It was October of 1995 when I left Tallahassee and drove down to Apalachicola to stay with my aunt for a few days. I remember that trip vividly because the Florida Panhandle was in the middle of a heat wave, and even the Gulf winds weren't enough to cool the thick, humid air that clung to your skin. I had just left a messy breakup and needed to be somewhere quiet, away from my apartment, my job, and the reminders of everything unravelling. My aunt owned a house on Avenue D, one of those old wood frame homes shaded by giant live oaks draped in Spanish moss. Apalachicola wasn't a tourist hotspot yet, not in 1995. The locals still ran the show, and downtown was quiet with brick buildings that looked like they'd been standing since the Civil War. My aunt's place was a few blocks from the Apalachicola River, and you could hear the soft churn of the water at night if you left the windows open. She was out of town on a riverboat restoration trip and had offered the house to me, saying it would do me good to have some time alone. The keys were left with a neighbour, and I arrived just after sunset, letting myself in and flipping on the ceiling fan in the front room. The place smelled faintly of cypress and old paper, books, photographs, antiques, and the floors creaked under every step. But I was used to it. I'd spent many summers here as a child. It had always been a safe place. I didn't sleep well that first night. I couldn't blame the house or the heat. I just felt off. I lay on the sofa with a light cotton sheet draped over me and stared at the ceiling fan rotating slowly above. The windows were open, screens in place, but the outside air didn't feel right. I remember listening to the crickets and frogs, but the longer I listened, the more I realised what I wasn't hearing. No wind, no river, just an oppressive stillness that felt unnatural. At some point, I drifted off. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when I woke again, but it was still dark, and I was suddenly alert. It wasn't a sound that woke me. It was the sense that something was watching the house. I sat up and immediately felt a tightness in my chest, like something pressing down on me from inside. There were no lights on in the house, but the moon was full, and the silver-blue light poured in through the window panes. That's when I noticed it. There was movement outside. Through the sheer curtain of the front window, I saw something pass, slow and deliberate, like a figure gliding silently along the walkway. I stood and moved closer, careful not to let the floor creak, and parted the curtain just enough to look. What I saw stopped my breath. There were 3 women standing at the edge of the yard, just beyond the fence. They were not dressed like anyone I had ever seen in town. Long, dark garments hung from their frames, and their hair, thick and tangled, seemed to shimmer under the moonlight in a way that didn't feel natural. They weren't speaking. They weren't looking at the house directly, but their bodies were angled toward it, like they were waiting. I remember thinking, with a kind of primal certainty, that they hadn't walked there. They had appeared. My instinct was to turn on the lights, maybe scare them off, but something told me not to. I backed away from the window and stood still, trying to hear if they were moving. But it was quiet again. So quiet it made the sound of my own breath feel intrusive. I went to the back room and sat on the bed, trying to convince myself that it was nothing, that I was just unsettled from the stress of the past few weeks. But the uneasy feeling clung to me. I turned on the table fan, trying to fill the silence with noise, and tried to lie down. That's when I heard it. My name. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't whispered. It was spoken at a normal volume, but wrong. The voice came from just outside the back window. It called again, and the way it said my name, it was like someone trying to imitate the way a human voice should sound, but not quite getting it right. There was a strange, guttural lilt to it, a weightless, hollow quality that made my skin crawl. I froze. There was no mistaking it. Someone, or something, was outside the back window, speaking my name in the dead of night. And then, as if it had read my thoughts, it spoke again. That was when I felt the first wave of dread, not fear exactly, but something deeper. Like my body was registering danger my mind couldn't fully grasp. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stared at the window, waiting for something to pass by, for a face to appear. But nothing did. I sat like that until dawn. When the first light finally crept through the curtains, the pressure lifted. The stillness gave way to the distant hum of insects and river wind, and I knew instinctively that whatever had come was gone, for now. I didn't sleep that day. I walked downtown and wandered aimlessly past the Gibson Inn, through the rows of art shops and oyster bars, pretending I felt normal. I bought a coffee and sat by the docks, watching the shrimp boats drift lazily along the bay. But the whole time, I had the sensation that I was being observed from afar, watched without being seen. That night, I thought maybe I was ready. I thought maybe I'd face it if it came again. But I was wrong. It didn't come to the window this time. It came into the house. I had turned off all the lights and lay on the bed again. But the moment I closed my eyes, I felt it. Not a presence near me, but inside. Like the house itself had turned against me. The walls no longer felt like shelter. The floorboards no longer familiar. I could feel something moving in the hall, something quiet and slow, like bare feet dragging lightly across the wooden floor. Then, the smell. It hit like a wave, sour, metallic, earthy. Not decay exactly, but something old, like roots torn from soil, like burnt herbs and rusted iron. It seeped under the door and filled the room. I opened my eyes and saw movement on the other side of the curtain. A shape. It was standing just outside the bedroom, motionless. I could see the hem of a dark dress, muddy, soaked, trailing something wet that left a mark on the floor. I didn't dare breathe. My hands were trembling under the sheet. I was terrified it would open the door. But it didn't. Instead, it turned and walked away. No sound, no footsteps, and the smell faded with it. When I stepped out into the hallway, there were footprints, bare, wet, darkened on the wood, but only for a few feet before they disappeared entirely, mid-stride, as though the thing that made them had simply ceased to exist. I packed my bags the next morning. I didn't wait for my aunt to return. I left her a note and drove back to Tallahassee in silence, windows rolled up despite the heat, afraid that if I let the wind in, I might hear that voice again. I don't know what those women were. I don't know what they wanted or why they came to that house while I was there. I've read about folk practices, about witches who still walk under different names. Some say the marshes and woods near Apalachicola hide things older than the towns themselves, that there are rituals that never stopped, just changed hands, changed forms. But I don't want to know. Not really. The only thing I do know is that I was not meant to see them, or hear them, and whatever came for me those nights, it recognized me, knew my name. Not the name my friends use, not the name I sign on papers. My name. The one I don't say aloud anymore.